Let's talk about leaderless movements. But firstly, let's define them. A leaderless movement is an organic, spontaneous protest movement. We have seen several examples of leaderless movements across the world, from Hong Kong to Chile to Iraq and Lebanon. And we've also seen them in Africa, in 2019, in Algeria, during the Arab Spring, in Tunisia, in Egypt, and in Libya. There have been some success stories as a result of these leaderless protest movements. There have been some success stories in terms of policies which have been modified or reversed. There have also been removals of prominent politicians as a result of this specific kind of protest action. Let's consider some of the examples. The Yellow Vest movement in France was able to get policy concessions in 2018. If you recall, Macron's government had proposed a massive fuel levy, but they had to back down on one of their key policies and announced a 6-month moratorium on a diesel tax that was supposed to go into effect in January, and that was aimed at reducing France's reliance on fossil fuels. As a result of the Yellow Vest movement, that was backpedaled. In 2019, the protest movements in Algeria were able to get the long-standing leader who was trying to run for a 5th term in office, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, to step down. That was another success story. If you look at Bolivia, Evo Morales, the president, stepped down in 2019 due to pressure from a protest movement. If we think about it, it's easy to understand the appeal of a leaderless protest movement. It's no secret that there is a low level of trust when it comes to political leaders around the world. They are viewed as being self-interested, they are viewed as being unethical, specifically as being corrupt, and they're also viewed as being incompetent. In Africa especially, there is a lot of baggage which comes from engaging with the political class. If you look at Nigeria, for example, they were celebrating 60 years of independence at the beginning of October. But in that 60 years, they have seen a rise of a political class that is not interested or capable in delivering the level of progress that the country needs. Leaderless movements represent something different. They represent a flat organization without the hierarchy, the complexity, and bureaucracy of a political party. Leaderless movements represent equality, and that's why they are so appealing to individuals who participate in them. They represent a fresh take, a fresh breath of air, and a move away from this party system. You can approach them as an individual, your voice will be heard, and you won't get all of this political baggage. Today, I want us to look at Nigeria as a case study for leaderless movements. There have been other leaderless movements in Africa this year. The Zimbabwean Lives Matter movement, which was protesting against police brutality and military brutality in Zimbabwe, is an example. The Shut It All Down movement in Namibia is another example. There have been several leaderless movements in South Africa. The MI Next movement, a leaderless feminist movement to protest against gender-based violence in South Africa, specifically femicide. Another example is the Fees Must Fall movement, which was a leaderless student movement to protest against the high cost of tuition in South Africa, as well as to call for the decolonization of universities. We've seen, however, over the last 2 weeks, a leaderless movement developing in Nigeria in the form of the End SARS movement, the hashtag End SARS movement. It's a movement that has called for the disbandment of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad in Nigeria.
Nigerians have taken to the street for what is now a second week of nationwide protests against police brutality.
Protests across the country started after a video circulated last week. It reportedly showed members of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, or SARS, fatally shooting a man and then driving off in his car.
This protest is being largely driven by young people. They say that they bear the brunt of the brutality of this specialist police unit. The hashtag #EndSARS trended worldwide on social media for days, with celebrities across the world of sport and entertainment getting in on the act.
Celebrities like Kanye West have joined in the recent protests, calling for an end to SARS.
Stop killing our boyfriends! Stop killing our children! tomorrow. End SARS now.
The Nigerian government has responded to these protests with lots of police brutality and violence, sometimes fatal.
In acts of police brutality on protesters demonstrating peacefully. Protesters dispersed by officers with water cannons, tear gas.
Live ammunition was used to disperse protesters against police brutality.
What is paramount to us is law and order. There must be law and order in whatever we are doing.
I spoke to someone from Nigeria, a gentleman called Faithfulness Okum. He is an attorney in Lagos, a lecturer at the University of Lagos. He studied at the University of Calabar. He's an avid debater and has won 12 coveted debating titles in his university debating career. He was in Lagos during the protests. He's a young and proud Nigerian, so I decided to listen as much as possible to his view on the End SARS protests which are ongoing in Nigeria. This is the conversation that we had.
Hi, Jimmy. So throughout this summary or analysis, whatever I may want to call it, I will try to be composed. My disposition in this and my body language isn't that of the average Nigerian now. Like, I think everybody out there is immensely angry, traumatized, livid, and I will just try to be composed because I think since I've been required to give an analytical breakdown of everything, it will not make sense for me to allow my mind and emotions to be clouded by the sentiments around. So I will just try to give a frank explanation of the whole instance. Nigerians, the older generation of the Nigerian populace is one that is awash with very docile people. You know, people who accept the minimum, people who are reluctant to fight and engage with the government, and to a large extent, we inherited that culture of quietness, of docility, and that has changed in the past few weeks. So the average Nigerian just wants to find a way to live his life, just wants to find a way to actualize maximally without the help of the government. That is why you see that we have people drilling their own boreholes. That is why we have people buying their own generators to get power and light. That's why we have people sometimes even fixing the roads to their own houses. You know, there is that culture of independence for the average Nigerian. We have given up on government generally. If you look at how much the Nigerian legislators earn annually, it's a lot. It's the average Nigerian senator earns more money in 2 months than the average American senator earns annually. And that is something that is deeply worrying. And the reason why things have gotten to that point is because of that culture of docility. We do not want to engage, we do not want to fight the government. I'm giving this background because you will later understand why the NSAS protest means a lot to us. So Nigerians don't really care about what government is doing, right? It's hard to spark this kind of conversation and this kind of protest around bad governance, right? Because we are used to the norm that has existed for all these years. So the point is, with the NSAS, with SARS, you know, SARS is the Special Anti-Robbery Squad. SARS came along, started off, I think, in 2005 or thereabouts, and, you know, there was police brutality, but it wasn't really serious. You know, when the instances of Nigerian fraud boys, they call them Yahoo boys, when those guys started defrauding people and, you know, buying houses and living good lives, I think that there was a jealousy from the police officers, you know. So, of course, instead of them to try to solve that problem, to nip that problem by the bud, they decided that they're going to benefit from that, that loophole in the system. So we saw them, arresting Yahoo boys, fraudsters, taking them to ATMs and extorting money from them. And that became a culture. Before you knew what was happening, just like the stereotypes against Nigerians exist abroad, within Nigeria, the stereotype became very, very broad and pervasive. So every young Nigerian who looked good, who drove a car, was a Yahoo boy to those police officers. And then they started killing them. They started being very brutal. They started taking tons of cash from average roaming Nigerians. And of course, this period of the existence of fraudsters coincided with the tech boom, the technological boom in Nigeria, with a lot of software developers, startup founders and all of that. And these people live the same lives, more or less. The average Nigerian founder or software developer earns a lot of money. So he's going to use good iPhones. He's going to drive a decent car. So they sort of put them in the same blanket. And harassment really started. Before you knew what was happening, they started collecting millions of naira from different young people walking on the streets. And it has happened for about 5 years now. In 2015 it started. I think in 2016 we heard that they were going to restructure the organization. The Special Anti-Robbery Squad. It was no longer SARS. It became FSARS, Federal Government SARS. Then in 2017 they restructured it again. Then we kept on protesting. A few people led those protests. There was a guy who was called Sega Link on Twitter. He was one of those who was vocal. He was always helping free incarcerated people. And then it got to 2020, where I think what really spurred the protest was that they threw someone out of a moving vehicle. The police officers threw someone out of a moving vehicle, and he was crushed to death. I'm not sure, but I think that this is what was the galvanizer of everything that has happened in the past few days. And Jamie, I'll tell you, to unite Nigerians is incredibly difficult because we are polarized along ethnic lines, along lines of gender. Nigerians thrive on differences. We love seeing the differences in ourselves. And the fact that this government has gotten Nigerians to unite on them on an issue is a big failure. So remember I told you that the Nigerian just wants to live his life. He doesn't want government interference in his life, right? So for this protest to get to this point, people were basically saying, let us live. We do not want to be killed. We don't want to die. We are making money from our own tactfulness. We are making money from our own intellect. We are making money from our own skills. Just allow us enjoy that money, because not everybody can run away, and go abroad, to the UK, to South Africa, wherever. Not everybody wants to leave Nigeria. So basically, for it to get to this point where we decided to attack the bull by the horns, Nigerians needed to see the threat to their own lives and the threat to their own existence. And that is exactly what has led to the NSAS movement becoming as global and to metastasize to this extent. And right now, the protests were peaceful, things were going well, and the Lagos State, in Lagos, for example, the Lagos State governor even came and joined the protest. He made it look like he was going to meet the demands, and even started meeting a few of the demands we made, because but the Nigerian government has its own playbook, its own textbook for how to deal with these kind of circumstances. And I think that there is a kind of fear and skepticism amongst the political elites that if they give in to our demands this easily, then we will be able to make more robust change. Because people on Twitter were now saying, look, after dealing with police brutality, we have to talk about our senators. We have to talk about how much they're earning. We have to talk about corruption. and all those things. So I think that the political class says that if they give us this victory, we will definitely want more, and of course that's completely factual. So what they did was to send thugs, and they have weaponized the poverty that they created. So they have sent thugs to come and disrupt peaceful protests, to come and kill people. And this is something that is everywhere on social media. We have seen thugs come in government-owned vehicles. We have seen dogs coming in SUVs, in Prado Jeeps to come and disrupt things. Now, a lot of those dogs were interrogated. Some of them were caught, beaten up by angry mobs of peaceful protesters, and they were interrogated. One of them said he was paid 1,500 naira. Jimmy, that is around $4. $4 or $5. He was paid $5 to go and kill people, to go and maim people who were protesting peacefully. Why will anybody agree to collect $5 if they do not know where their next meal was going to come from? So Nigerian politicians have deliberately created a climb with illiterates and with poor people who will be willing to, rig elections for them and all of that. So right now, yesterday, the Lagos State governor, after the political class in Lagos had paid talks to disrupt the protests and to even burn down certain police stations, because they do that. They want to create a veneer of violence and anarchy, so they step in and rescue things. So after thugs had come in, paid thugs had come in to create a mess, they now decided to announce a curfew. And the curfew was to take effect from 4 o'clock, but it was announced by 12 p.m. Imagine how crazy that is. People had 4 hours. I mean, if you know Lagos, it's difficult to get around. And quite insanely, they decided to to unleash the military. The protest, there was around 6 or 7, the governor announced an extension of the curfew time to 9 p.m. to allow people to get home. And at 6:45 or thereabouts, peaceful protesters in Lekki, I would like to give this comment. Those people were stuck because they couldn't get home, because there were no cabs to move. So they decided to stay there. Those people were attacked by men of the military. There's evidence all over social media. You can find the videos very easily. They were attacked by men of the military, and they were shot at. We are hearing that about 20 people died. The figures are really uncertain, because there were reports from eyewitnesses that after shooting at the protesters, the military wanted to take away dead bodies. And of course, because they wanted to deny that there were any deaths. And today, the governor of Lagos State followed that playbook and came out to deny that anybody died. He said nobody has died so far, just about 10 people were injured, which is a very big lie, because there is enough evidence to show that there were several deaths. So that is the situation of things. I am livid, I'm angry, but I'm also really positive that this is going to be our own shot at change. This is going to be our own Arab Spring. The Nigerian government has messed with the wrong generation. We are resilient. This is not going to end in a victory for the government. I'm quite certain about that, because our resolve has increased. We are definitely going to fight for our futures and our lives. So that's everything that's been happening. I thank you for the opportunity here to be on your show.
If I may, I would like to ask you some follow-up questions, just based on what you've raised in your first response. The one thing is, are the differences within the movement going to be reconcilable? Those who are focused on police brutality, SARS, and SWAT, versus those who want broader societal change. Is there not going to be a rift, or is there a coalition, or rather a coalescing of views towards broader governmental change? Because if it is going to lead to an Arab Spring direction, it would need to mature from just protest about the police brutality to more societal protests, which you said that Nigerians are accustomed to. My second question is around leaderless movements. If you recall, there was Occupy Wall Street, which did not really achieve the objectives for which it was created. There has been Black Lives Matter, which has not also been able to defund or reform policing. So my question is, when you consider leaderless movements, do you think that movements such as the End SARS movement can move forward to a point where the youth can actually attain tangible policy reforms, especially considering the, tactics that are being used by the old politicians, as well as the endemic and historic corruption in the political circles? I guess what I'm trying to get to here is leaderless movements don't necessarily have a good track record, even when you think about the Fees Must Fall movement in South Africa, where students were fighting for reduced fees. And maybe this question is still very early, but do you think that this momentum can be built? I will admit that seeing the amount of international support from Twitter, from large celebrities, from a variety of industries is something that is unique to this protest movement and not common. But I think the question still remains, do you think that this movement will be able to transcend some of the issues that have held back leaderless movements before?
So the questions you have asked are really, really brilliant questions. But of course, there are answers. So firstly, about if the differences between those who want to end SARS and who are advocating for broader reforms can be resolved. If those differences can be resolved, I think yes. The point is that I think that the government has made a huge mistake now because they have fast-tracked the revolution in the sense that it was about SARS before, but right now, even if you end SARS, people are still going to be protesting against the brutality of the government. So I think that they have the movement I felt was going to organize and grow organically to morph into a more robust challenge of the system. But I think that right now, with these brutal killings, with the militarization of the police, and with the government unleashing the soldiers to the streets, I think that the movement is going to take a different dimension. So I think that the differences are reconcilable, because people who are against SARS have actually perceived the fact that they have power to create tangible change. See, power is something that I believe intoxicates people, even the best of us. And I think that the power that the people have wielded in these few weeks is going to get to them. It's not going to intoxicate them in a bad way, but it's going to make them to know that they have the power and the ability to create real change within the society. So I think that the differences can be reconciled to a large extent. I still have concerns over if the northern part of Nigeria will really get behind a movement that seeks robust reforms for multiple reasons. First of all, there's a large level of illiteracy in the north. It's difficult to get people to understand the various governmental problems because they are so accustomed to the norms. I think most of the older generation in the southern side of Nigeria are just docile because of the fact that their resistance was met with force. They have seen they survived the civil war in Nigeria and they have just become accustomed to what has been going on. But I think in the north, the older generation, for example, are mostly illiterate and are also very poor. So I think it's going to be hard to get them along, but I think that this revolution has the potential to also get them involved because the issues are not very difficult to understand. You get the issues are relatable. People understand bad governance. the Northerners haven't really seen good governance because many of them do not travel out. Many of them just go to Niger, which is also underdeveloped. So I think that there is the chances are high that we can have a very united front. And meet ask the governments for more greater demands like slashing the salaries of the members of the National House of Assemblies, and senators and leaders generally. So I think there's hope in that sense. Secondly, about leaderless movements, I think that you gave good examples of leaderless movements which have failed. But I think what you have to understand there is that those movements are movements that were born out of the consciousness of the people, that were born out of the people having an understanding that enough is enough. The government has been evil. Occupy Wall Street was more as a result of the collective consciousness that people had to understand the destruction that the capitalist structure was bringing. They didn't need any single individual to galvanize them. Fees must fall too. I think people felt the hardship, right? And there was no need for any motivational speaker or any activist to make them understand that the fees were outrageous. And I think that not having any meaningful success in those circumstances does not mean that this movement is not going to succeed, or leaderless movements generically are bound to fail, because I think the Arab Spring did not have any clear-cut leader. The 1989 revolution in Europe did not have any leaders. So I think that there have been a few success stories of leaderless movements, but I think it is crucial that the movement here is leaderless, because the Nigerian government is skilled with bribing leaders. We do not have a very functioning civil society. We do not have any functioning Labour Congress. The Labour Congress is politicized, it's filled up with people who want their own individual agenda. The Academic Staff Union, for example, is filled up of leaders who are self-interested, who do not care about the masses. If you rely on leaders in Nigeria, those leaders are going to be corrupt. And that's why this movement has even lasted this long. If this movement had any clear-cut leader, it is either the leader would have been arrested or could have been bribed so heavily. In certain parts of Nigeria, the government has offered bribes to certain leaders and they have taken those bribes. But because the people are not listening to anyone categorically, they still continue protesting. And that is what has turned the government. In a state here called Uyo, in a state called Akwa Ibom State, the capital is Uyo, the governor gave about 4 million naira, or a member of the government gave about 4 million naira to about 4 different youth leaders, thinking that they were the ones who galvanized the young people and they were going to be able to stop the movement. And those leaders collected the monies. I know of one of them who collected the money, but could not stop people. And then people kept accusing him of being a sellout, and it has happened, in different parts. The government has come in with a lot of millions to bribe the people who appear to be leaders. And everybody keeps saying we have no leader. But the point is, I think that with our movement, there's a clarity of purpose. We have been able to come with what we called 5 for 5. We came out with 5 clear-cut demands, asking for separate things. I think first of all, they wanted justice for all the families, a compensation to all the families who have been affected by police brutality. They wanted increase in police salaries. They wanted a judicial panel to be set up, a sort of truth and reconciliatory panel to be set up. They wanted, I think, 2 other demands, but there were 5 in number, and they were clear cuts. Right, and the government knows the things that we want. So if it is the case that people are protesting and there's no clarity of what they want, of their demands, I think a leader might bring clarity. But in this case, without leaders, we have been able to come out with a clear-cut plan as to what we want, clear-cut demands as to the various things that we want implemented. And up till now, those demands have been out for over a week. And up till now, about only 2 of them have been touched on, not even addressed protest significantly. So I think that in our case, knowing what we want, if we come out on the street again for a protest against bad governance, we cannot just be protesting bad governance generically. We know the demands that we have to make. We know that we have to start by saying the salaries of the members of the national legislative houses must be slashed by 60, 70, 80%. We know those demands, and I think that the people involved here are enlightened enough to understand that they have to be strategic, understand that they cannot just go and make bogus demands or no demands at all and just create difficulties within society. So I think that ours is different than the Fees Must Fall movement or Occupy Wall Street. I think that we have clear demands. I think the Occupy Wall Street movement was quite bogus. The demands were really unrealistic, but our demands are not unrealistic. I think we have a good chance at achieving our aims. Yeah. So once again, thank you a lot.
Since I spoke to Faithfulness, there have been some developments in Nigeria. The President Buhari actually gave a live address, and in that live address, basically, some of the highlights indicated that the sentiment from the youth was one that the adults, or rather the elderly leadership, did not receive quite well. Some of the comments he made was that the protest started off being fine, but then they were misdirected and hijacked. That already shows a leadership that is not willing to really address the issues. He then also spoke about the actions of some of the members of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, as opposed to discussing the systemic nature of its conduct. So in doing so, he reduced the claims of the protest movement and reduced the nature of the problem, rather than saying this whole unit was so bad it must be disbanded, which they have said they have done, but rather saying, listen, it was only some of the people in the force. This is the kind of commentary which shows a leadership which is not willing to deal with the issues which are underlying. He blamed protesters for the violence, and then he also warned them and told them that, they should not view the government as being weak, and they should not view the fact that the government agreed to their demands as a sign of weakness. The comments made by Buhari really lacked accountability, lacked understanding of the systemic problem, and showed that actually there's a disconnect between the eldership that runs Nigeria and the youth who are making these particular demands. So it does make me reflect a little bit on the leaderless movement and its ability to attain the goals that it set out. In fact, even the African Union, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, issued a statement, and that statement said, "We strongly condemn the violence that erupted on the 20th of October during protests in Lagos, Nigeria, that has resulted in multiple deaths and injuries. The chairperson offers his sincere condolences to the families of those who lost their lives, wishes a speedy recovery to the injured. The chairperson appeals to all political and social actors to reject the use of violence and respect human rights and the rule of law. He further urges all parties to privilege dialogue in order to de-escalate the situation and find concrete and durable reforms. In this regard, the chairperson welcomes the decision by the federal government to disband the Special Anti-Robbery Squad SARS as an important step in this direction. The chairperson reiterates the African Union's commitment to continue to accompany the government and the people of Nigeria in support of a peaceful solution, and encourages the Nigerian authorities to conduct an investigation to ensure that the perpetrators of acts of violence are held to account. The statement from the African Union ends in that fashion, and I think if you think about it, it really seems to be echoing a lot of the messaging from the government of Nigeria, and not necessarily a lot of the messaging from the youth of Nigeria. And that shows some of the problems which exist at an African Union level, that it's an old people's institution and not a young people's institution. And that goes back to some of the stuff we discussed in the last episode, that the youth of Africa cannot expect to reform Africa through the institutions created, managed, and populated by the elderly people of Africa. They lack the urgency, they lack the will, the vision to reform Africa and to create an Africa that young people deserve. Having said all of that, in closing, I want to say I do think that the SARS movement, the End SARS movement, has created a moment for young Nigerians which will not be easily erased. If you think about the Black Lives Matter movement, it started off years ago, and even though it was not able to gain its demand, it has created a discursive energy in society and been able to mobilize the Black community in ways that I think have influenced the world, not always in a policy or leadership change aspect, but definitely in tangible ways on the ground for the people who are living. So I think that if you look at the Black Lives Matter movement, I think now it's in its 7th year, you will see an evolution and an escalation of that particular movement. So in the same vein, I think that a movement that was able to unite young Nigerians across the country and across the world is one that will continue to exist beyond this particular moment and beyond this round. You see, sometimes I think leaderless movements are always assessed in a very short-term perspective. We protested in 2015. Where's the thing that we were protesting for? But I do think that they can be assessed in other ways, and those assessments are equally tangible. But I do have some lingering questions. One of those questions is, how long can this particular grassroots movement last? And this applies now going back to all of the leaderless movements. How long can these grassroots movements last without a clear organizer at the helm? Do they need a clear organizer or a committee of organizers at the helm? Black Lives Matter does have that. So it's not really a leaderless movement in the true sense of the word, because they do have a leadership. They do have an organized structure, even though it has a flat leadership structure. It's not exactly the same as Yellow Vests, Occupy Wall Street, or even Fees Must Fall. So a question does exist in that capacity. And I think it does apply to MI Next, it does apply to Shut It All Down in Namibia, it does apply to Zimbabwean Lives Matter, and it also does apply to End SARS. Do these protests risk morphing into something that even its participants can't control? That's a second question that still lingers in respect of leaderless movements, particularly End SARS, because there are a multiplicity of political contestations in Nigeria, and even though the youth want to keep those politics out, how long can they keep them out as a leaderless structure? Lastly, is this lack of centralized leadership a source of weakness or a source of strength? Can these leaderless movements operate with consistency across the board without leadership? And I think lastly, the last question I have that is lingering, and I want you to think about it, and if you have thoughts on it, to share them with me, is, can leaderless movements succeed in African spaces where the politicians and the systems around them are corrupt and actually are creative around corruption? African politicians are conniving, they are sneaky, they bribe young people, they sometimes kill young people, and they operate in ways that really try to suffocate the access to platforms of expression or power for young people. So in areas where the world is not paying the same kind of attention as they were in Hong Kong or Belarus, will these kind of movements be able to navigate without that global scrutiny? Because African politicians do arrest young people, people do get abducted, they disappear. If you think about Zimbabwe, that happens frequently. Now the question that lingers is, will these leaderless movements that are emerging under COVID-19 be able to survive that? That's where we're going to leave it today. This has been an episode of Josie to Lagos. I'm Mighty Jamie, and this podcast really exists to examine African issues from an African perspective, to try to get the fundamental questions that we as young Africans need to create the Africa we deserve. This won't be told to us by CNN. It won't be told to us by Al Jazeera. It will be told to us by us as a community. Let's continue creating the content. Let's continue participating in the conversations. Till the next episode.